Welcome everybody to our presentation today. I want to start off by first thanking ASQ Boston for inviting us to come and present to you today. We're going to be talking about big data, not bad data, and how we can utilize digital tools to manage production records out on the shop floor. So during today's discussion, we're, like I said, going to be talking about how most companies struggle to gain insight into some pretty critical manufacturing data. And this lack of insight is often related to outdated paper processes that exist out on the shop floor. The key takeaway that I hope everybody gains from this presentation is going to be how we can focus on utilizing technology to collect data, connect data to other systems, and then contextualize that data to make valuable, informed decisions about operations and manufacturing. So hopefully after today, we'll all discover a new way of thinking about how to apply this critical manufacturing data to making key business decisions. So by way of introduction, my name is Adam Sybrowsky, and I work for a company called MasterControl as a business development manager. And I've spent the last 10 plus years or so working with and consulting with manufacturing companies on how to improve their processes, specifically related to production records. When we use the term production records, we're talking about batch records, device history records, travelers, those types of things. So I've worked closely with C-level executives on how to streamline those processes and how we at MasterControl work with companies to help them utilize this as we've come up with a product that digitizes and automates those processes and offers insight to companies that helps them make more informed decisions.
And just to introduce myself, my name is Jennifer Hurst. I also work for MasterControl. Decided to join Adam today. I'm just going to provide a little color commentary here and there. We thought this presentation would be more fun if there was two of us presenting to you today.
Always goes a lot better when Jen participates. So,
thank you.
To start, let's talk about some of the challenges that exist in a paper-based manufacturing approach. So like I said, I've spent the last 10 years or so traveling literally all over the world working with and consulting with manufacturing companies in the life sciences industry. And what comes as a big surprise to me is these companies are making huge innovations and advancements in technology and in medicine, but most of them, I'd say the vast majority, 98% or more, are still using outdated paper-based processes when they're gathering the production data. When they're filling out paperwork that travels alongside the product as it's built. And it just surprises me that that's the case. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about paper-based processes and we talk about paper problems, let's make sure we're all on the same page here. So paper-based production records, that means, like I said, the paper that follows the product along the manufacturing floor as it's built or as it's mixed or as it's compiled. Like I said, some companies call them batch records, some call them DHRs or device history records, some call them travelers. We're going to refer to that paper today as production records. So it's just the paper that follows the product along as it's built. And if you're using a paper-based approach today, the slide that you're seeing on the screen now will probably resonate with you in a comical way. You're all very familiar with all the strike-throughs, all the illegible handwriting, the signatures that may be missing, that may be illegible. It's just a very cumbersome, a very inefficient process that most manufacturing companies today are still utilizing. The graph that's now on the screen might be a little bit hard to read, but what that represents is the total number of errors that a manufacturing CMO company that we work with found during 1 month. And like I said, it may be a little bit hard to see, but those bars are measuring in the hundreds. And those bars represent errors like missing information or missing signatures, wrong dates or wrong times, illegible marks, incorrect entries, empty fields that aren't properly NA'd, all of those types of issues that go along with having a paper-based process that human beings are interacting with. Going now into some of the other areas and inefficiencies that are present in a paper-based process, you introduce missing training or outdated training records that may exist as well outside of the paper-based production records. You may have instances where wrong or outdated SOPs and work instructions are referenced, and they can be difficult trace to current processes that exist on paper. You often have friction between quality and production when you're operating in a paper-based environment, because you have paper-based production records, and because the quality documents, the SOPs, the work instructions, the training records, the quality events like deviations and CAPAs may be paper-based processes as well. It just introduces all sorts of areas for disconnect and for inefficiencies. Mm-hmm. To say nothing of the fact that when the manufacturing out on the shop floor is complete, now we have this potentially massive pile of papers that represents a production record or a batch record or a DHR that quality now has to go through and review and find all of those things that we referenced earlier, like the missing signatures or the wrong calculations or the missing dates and those types of things, and then ultimately sign off on that process and release the paperwork. Yeah. And only then can a product be shipped.
And I think some of the recent things that have been happening in our industry, like a pandemic, have even exemplified that paper problem even more, because now we have a remote workforce. Right now we have all these people working remotely. How do you keep the paper moving, right? If your batch record is this deep on paper, that means your quality people have to come in, versus being in a digital environment where now you can keep those documents moving and review things from a remote work environment, which allows you to continue really doing business when these types of situations
Absolutely.
happen.
You're able to access critical information remotely from literally any location in the world because you're operating in a digital environment now. So all of this nasty, hairy process that we've been describing to you guys in a paper-based environment can kind of be summed up as what we call a ripple effect. So when manufacturers are using manual paper-based systems, like we said, human errors and poor data integrity are just a natural result of that. And what that does, when we introduce bad data, or in some cases no data, into the equation, that oftentimes leads to deviations, which always equates to non-productive time and time that is costing companies money in increased expenses for quality and review time and those types of things. And that all concatenates to lost revenue, which obviously we as manufacturers in the life sciences industry want to avoid at all costs. So what is the solution to all of this?
The solution is to connect all of your information on a digital platform to be able to access your data. And so I'm going to jump to the end game here. I'm going to jump to the end game, and then I'm going to kick it back to Adam. He's going to tell you how we got there. So ultimately, when everything is connected on a digital platform, including your batch records or your production records, you have the ability to analyze. And I'm going to go way outside of manufacturing, and we're going to talk baseball for a minute. If you've seen the movie Moneyball or you've read the book, it's a fantastic movie, and it's a great story about the Oakland A's and their manager, Billy Beane, who's played by Brad Pitt. He had an interesting situation. He did not have a huge budget like, say, the New York Yankees, but he needed to figure out a way to get his team winning again so that people would start going to games and that they would start being a profitable organization. And during that time frame, he tapped into data to be able to figure out how to make that work. So if you want to go to the next slide. So typically, there's a lot of hype around big name players. There's gut instinct. There's, maybe you've been watching them play other places and you're like, hey, I want that guy on my team. But you're not really using any data. You're using more emotion to make your picks. So this is an example of how they had one of the lowest payrolls of all of the teams in Major League Baseball, but had one of the highest performing teams. So they looked at things like, how do I just get my player on base? How do I get my players around the bases? So things like slugging percentage, on-base percentage, total runs scored. And when they looked at this data, they were able to find players who were maybe undervalued in the market, but high performers, right? And if we think about like business as a whole, isn't that what we want? We want to be able to get high production without putting in big resources. So basically, he took a whole bunch of players and he cultivated them into the team, and they started to win, and they started to win more, and then ended up clinching the what did they clinch?
Division.
The division.
Yeah, they clinched their division.
Yes, so they clinched their division. So they didn't actually get to the World Series and win the World Series on it, so maybe that's a little anticlimactic, but still a great story.
So yeah, it's a great example, and I love sports analogies because they're relevant, very relevant to business. So really what we need in the manufacturing world for life sciences companies is a Moneyball approach. So in order to do that, however, we need to be able to collect the data in a way that will allow us to have insight into trends and insight into that actual data. So we're going to talk about 3 different pieces of introducing efficiency into the manufacturing process. First, like I said, we need to collect the data to start. Once we've collected the data, we need to be able to connect the electronic production record system where we're able to collect the data to existing manufacturing systems that may be in place. Once we've done that, once we've collected the data and we've connected it to existing systems, we'll be in a place where we're able to contextualize what we see and make critical business decisions based on this new insight. So first, like I said, we need to collect. And to do that, we introduce an electronic production record system. And the reason why this is such a game changer as opposed to a paper-based process is once we've digitized the production records and automated those processes, we're able to have control over processes that is otherwise impossible to enforce if you're operating on paper. So we're able to configure the master production record templates themselves and build in things like formulas, calculations. We're able to completely do away with human errors. We're able to enforce right first time approaches. For example, companies won't, or I should say operators out on the manufacturing floor won't be able to advance to another section of the production record until certain areas or all areas that are required are populated. And not only populated, but populated with the data that falls into pre-configured ranges.
Right. It's kind of like a fail-safe method. One of the examples I used once was you can't put a diesel hose into a regular gasoline tank, right? It won't fit, it's the wrong size. Well, you can't put the wrong data into your digital platform, right? It's going to have parameters in there. So if you're out of specification or if your date format is wrong, it'll reformat it for you, right? It just eliminates human error, like you said.
And in a paper-based approach, you can't have that kind of enforcement because operators and technicians and chemists are literally out there on the shop floor with clipboards of paper and a pen.
And the quality person isn't standing over their shoulder watching everything.
And they don't want them to.
No, right, exactly.
They want to keep them away.
So that's where the digital system really makes everyone's life better.
So everybody wins, exactly.
Yeah, it does.
And we're able, now that we've digitized the process, to introduce things like Part 11 compliant electronic signatures. So the whole exercise of signing things, initialing things, all goes away because we automate that process in an electronic system. Continuing on the automation front, we're able to automatically apply date and timestamps in real time. So not only are we avoiding now missing that information, but we know that it's going to be correct every time. As I said before, we're able to require certain fields. So an operator or a technician out on the shop floor now has to populate that field before they can move forward in a step or in a process. So that all alleviates the burden on the review process because you know that everything that needs to be there by nature is going to be there. And obviously, since we're in a digital regulated and validated environment, there needs to be, and in electronic production record systems are full traceability of all changes and corrections that need to take place. So we want to be able still to empower people to be able to change things, but we just need to make sure we do that in a regulated and validated way. So now that we have all of the data collected, we now need to shift and make sure that we can connect this electronic production record system to existing manufacturing systems out on the shop floor. We know that there are a ton of different pieces of software that participate in the manufacturing process. You have ERPs or MRPs. In some instances, you have MES systems, LIMS systems, and in regulated environments, obviously, we have quality management systems. And all of that information feeds into and takes from the production record. A couple examples of that and how we're able to efficiently connect an electronic production record system to, let's say, an ERP, and why that's advantageous would be real-time reconciliation of materials and inventory with your ERP. So now that we've digitized the production record process, we're able to have real-time insight into our materials and into our inventory in the ERP once that connection is established.
Mm-hmm. And I think, good point. We've taken a lot of care with the initial system to eliminate human error. Now, when we're pushing and pulling information back and forth between systems, we can be assured that the data integrity stays.
Absolutely.
It stays true, right? We're not putting all this information in and then passing it over to someone else who has to re-enter the data and opens up the opportunity for mistakes.
Very true. And also a big piece, obviously, in the regulated life sciences spaces is connection to a quality management system. Those of us who are in manufacturing or in quality know how important this process can be when we talk about things like referencing appropriate and released SOPs and work instructions, ensuring that training is in place and that operators and technicians are trained in certain processes, making sure that quality events like deviations and out of specifications are tied to the appropriate step from which they were launched. You have the ability to do that when both systems are digitized and connected to each other. And that makes a huge difference, like I said, because everything, when the production record is complete and when it then goes to quality for review, everything that needs to be reviewed from an FDA regulation standpoint is in the same place and connected and validated, which makes a huge difference. You don't have any missing parts.
Right. And you were talking earlier about the quality person having to sift through all those pieces of paper and look at everything. But with the digital system, they can now review by exception.
Absolutely.
Which is a completely different ballgame, right? And we're going to get to some proof points later on. But now we're back in that business conversation where we're talking about if I can get my product, my finished product, off the line and shipped, that expedites my revenue. That brings that revenue in faster, which then is a direct hit to the bottom line. So now what we're talking about is creating not just the data integrity parts, but we're creating some huge efficiencies.
That's a really good point. And I want to talk a little bit more about that, because now that everything has been digitized and automated and is connected, when it comes to that review process, because like we said earlier, the product isn't finished until it's released, and it can only be shipped once that paperwork is signed off on. So when a quality person receives a 100 or 200 page production record, in a paper-based environment, they need to go through each one of those pages individually and sift through and review all of the data that exists in those oftentimes hundreds of pages of information. Whereas now that we've digitized that process, those individuals are able to take a review by exception approach. Where instead of sifting through hundreds of pages, they're able to have insight into specific instances of, okay, maybe a deviation was launched here. What happened? Has that deviation been closed out? Okay, yes, we're good to go, sign off on it. So what in the past, and we'll talk a little bit more about some specific examples, but what in the past has taken days and weeks, literally now takes minutes and hours. So your product can get out the door that much faster, and you're able to invoice your customers or introduce that cash flow into the business that much sooner.
Right, and that is definitely something that the C-suite is interested in.
Absolutely.
They're always interested in being able to get that revenue to the bottom line faster.
So now that we've talked about how we collect the data and connect the data to existing systems, we're now able to contextualize that data. So this goes back to the Moneyball example. Now that we have all of this insight that previously was unknown to us, what can we do with it? And the possibilities are literally endless. So like I said, limits on certain areas of the manufacturing process are enforced in real time. They can be tracked. So it's very easy to notice trends in manufacturing when, for example, those limits are exceeded. Maybe it's an indication that a piece of equipment is trending towards being out of specification or out of tolerance. You'll have insight into all of that. Maybe you have a step of the process where you're noticing that a deviation is launched every time or every other time. And so it empowers your organization to be able to be proactive into those instances as opposed to sitting back and being reactive to them. So it really changes the game in terms of insight into these processes that have been unknown to us. In a digital system, we're able to offer dashboards that convey relevant information through widgets, and these can be configured based on company need. And it just offers visibility and monitoring in real time to things that are happening out on the shop floor. So this type of insight can also be used to identify, like I said, maybe where certain materials have been used, where SOPs and work instructions are linked, like I said, in reference to the deviations earlier, where those are happening, how often they're happening. It gives insight into run times and really empowers organizations to take a look at manufacturing processes in real time and be proactive with improving those processes.
So if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, that uptime per line, this is also where your C-suite's going to be really excited, right? They don't want downtime. You can't be productive when your line's not running, right? And so all the things that Adam just talked about, that being proactive piece, whether it's maybe it's one supplier's materials are causing problems, or like you said, a piece of equipment is starting, is starting to get run down, and you need to do some maintenance on it so it's back in tolerance. Those are the types of things that when you're proactive, you save time, and when you save time, you can again keep moving and keep those revenue numbers coming, and that's again where the C-suite's always going to be have a keen eye on that information.
Time is money. One other thing that I wanted to point out, we hit on this a little bit earlier, but dashboards like the one you're seeing on the screen can be accessed from anywhere. So that's important, especially in today's environment with the virus and with remote work being a lot more commonplace for companies. Individuals can access this information literally from anywhere. They don't have to go into the office. They don't have to wait for an email. They can log in from a tablet or from a laptop, from their phone if they want to, and be able to have insight into real-time processes that are occurring out on the shop floor. So what does all of this mean? Now that we have all of this insight, now that we're able to collect the data efficiently, connect it to other systems that exist, and contextualize and make critical business decisions based on this new insight, how does that affect us? So I want to spend a couple of minutes now just talking about some examples that we've seen from, I should say, customers that are utilizing our digital production record system and some of the efficiencies that they've been able to recognize as a result of that. So the first one is a biotech company located in the Bay Area. And having implemented our electronic production record system, they have been able to realize a greater than 30% efficiency gain compared to a paper-based process. So this company made the decision to implement a digital production record system at the onset of their manufacturing. So their calculations and the formulas that they used told them that if they were to do this and they were able to have the type of insights that we've described, they would be able to increase manufacturing efficiency by greater than 30%.
Yep. And I think the really interesting part about that is now you have people, highly intelligent people that you've hired onto your staff that can put those talents to use doing process improvement things. And instead of managing paper, they can now actually do more meaningful work, right? They're spending more time doing the analysis, looking at numbers, improving the process, which again, I'm going to go back to, the C-suite likes to see those kind of things, right? I didn't bring in some really talented individual to manage paper. I want them to actually improve my process.
And you bring up a really good point, Jen. So going back to all the consulting that I've done with manufacturing companies over the last decade or so, I've yet to meet anybody that got into the life sciences industry to review paperwork. I haven't met one yet, but a lot of people are doing that.
Yeah.
And we can completely do away with that process by digitizing the production records. Another example that I want to talk about comes from Wellington Foods. So Wellington Foods is a CMO organization located in Southern California. And prior to implementing our digital production record system, they were paper-based, manufacturing their production records. They call them batch records on paper. And having implemented a digital production record system, they realized a greater than 90% improvement in GDP-related errors. So things like missing signatures, some of the things we outlined earlier, missing signatures, wrong dates, wrong calculations, things like that, they were able to get rid of more than 90% of those. And so you can imagine what that does to speeding up the process of being able to release that product and ship it that much faster when you're dealing with batch records or production records that literally don't contain any mistakes or any errors.
Yeah, and I think too what you see in that situation is that quality really appreciates it too, right? So manufacturing appreciates it because they're catching it right away, right? And then quality comes in, they're like, hey, you guys did a great job, everything was perfect. and it almost reduces the friction.
Absolutely.
Right? Sometimes there's friction between those two departments, and when you enable your manufacturers to get it right the first time, you make your quality department really happy, and that friction kind of releases.
Everybody wins.
Yep, that's right.
So the third example comes to us from Legacy Pharmaceutical Packaging. So Legacy is a packaging organization out of St. Louis, Missouri. They started off with paper-based processes as well, and made the decision to implement a digital production record system, and they were able to realize a greater than 25% reduction in total deviations, which oftentimes were leading to corrective and preventative actions. So having digitized that process, like I said, they were able to be more proactive with where they were seeing those deviations and make improvements and changes and modifications to the production record templates themselves to avoid and cut down on those deviations and those out of specifications.
That's awesome. And that's where they basically stopped the ripple effect.
They were able, significantly shrink that ripple effect. That's exactly right. The final example we're going to use today comes to us from Epibone. Epibone is in the personalized medicine industry, and they were operating with paper-based production records as well. And when we talk about, again, the review process of that paperwork, of those production records, when the manufacturing out on the floor or in the lab is technically completed, that paperwork then goes to quality to be reviewed and ultimately released and signed off on. And only then can the product be shipped or released. So in the past with Epibone, they were taking up to 2 weeks to go through all of the paperwork that consisted of a single production record, review the information, make sure not only that it's there and in the correct place, but that the information itself is correct. And we alluded to this earlier, and this is a real example of a company that's been able to significantly shrink that review time. They were able to do what took them 2 weeks on paper, now is taking them less than a day to do in a digital process. Mm-hmm. Because like I said, all of the data that goes into the production record is correct at the time that it's entered. All of the quality events that may be associated with some of those processes are all synced and all linked to the record itself. So really, you're only looking at a few things instead of reviewing potentially hundreds of pages worth of information. Mm-hmm. So Epibone was able to significantly shrink their process, again, going from 2 weeks down to less than a day. That's huge for a business. Mm-hmm.
It is. And the thing that I love about Epibone, so Adam alluded that they're in personalized medicine. They actually make custom implants, right? So if you need a knee replacement or a hip replacement or even a cartilage replacement, it's custom made from real bone. And one of the things that we always talk about at MasterControl is getting life-changing products to more people sooner. And so this is one where the production review time, cutting that down means that that product gets to the patient faster. So now we're having real impact on someone's life and getting them the implant that they need.
Absolutely. So just to summarize everything that we talked about today, remember Moneyball. And yes, the baseball is great, especially if you're an A's fan. But just remember that data is literally money. And we're able, as manufacturing organizations in the life sciences industry, to gain insight into manufacturing data that's otherwise been untapped or impossible to look at in certain ways. And so it's all about increasing efficiency and decreasing risk. And with an electronic production record system, we're able to collect all of that data in real time, connect it to existing systems, and contextualize it so we can make those informed decisions and reveal some of those hidden insights and be a lot more proactive as opposed to being reactive with a paper-based system.
All right. Well, I think that was an awesome presentation. And I think now we're going to go to live Q&A with Adam. I'm going to step out from Q&A because he's going to as the one that's going to have all the answers for you. But we want to thank you for your time today, and we really want to thank ASQ Boston again for inviting us to present at their annual conference.
Okay, let's take some questions.